The story begins in a large country house where, despite the late hour, the lights were still on brightly and loud noises could be heard coming from inside. As it turned out, a shootout had taken place here. The bodies of several people lay on the floor, and a man, who was likely their killer, was making his way further and further across the room. The man continued what he was doing and once again shot two men. One of them fell, bleeding profusely, while the other, who was standing behind him at that moment, screamed in horror. Terrified, the man fell to the floor and begged to be spared, offering a large sum of money in exchange and arguing that his death would not bring a certain girl back. But the man was unyielding. He turned out to be a young man with a gun and a knife in his hands, and he was determined to finish what he had started. After that, saying that it was all over, he raised his hand and pulled the trigger. A shot rang out. He had indeed done everything exactly as he had planned. The story then takes us forward a year to the peaceful city of Billionaire, which looks like an ordinary peaceful town, with people walking and cars driving everywhere. The same guy who was holding a gun is now standing near a mobile stall. It looks like he's buying refrigerators, color TVs, and used cell phones. This guy's name is Chen Liuhe. Right now, a traffic accident is unfolding before his eyes. A black car has struck a pedestrian. As a result, the pedestrian fell to the ground and screamed in pain, while the driver got out of the black car, surrounded by surprised passers-by. The driver of the car turned out to be a beautiful woman, wearing high black heels and a red business suit. Her hair was an unusual shade of red. Her name was Qin Johan. She approached the pedestrian lying on the road with concern and asked if he was all right. In response, the man, who was lying on the ground in a rage, says that he nearly died and broke both his legs. He asks her how she wants to handle the situation, with or without the police. It seemed like everyone around realized that it was just an act, and that the guy was really just a common con artist looking to make a quick buck. Shin Johan, realizing this as well, offers to take the victim to the hospital and says that if her guilt is proven, she agrees to take full responsibility for what happened. The guy on the ground agrees, but he warns her that she has to go with him to the hospital and that they'll prove she's guilty anyway. The girl realizes he's a con artist and has no intention of hanging around with him all day. Because of this, she turns to Chen Liuhe and tells him she doesn't have any time at all, asking him to take the injured person to the hospital. In response, the young man was very surprised. He replies that he doesn't have time for that, and that he has other things to do. His business is in full swing, and he's making a couple of yuan a minute. In response, Qin Johan gave him money to settle his hospital bill and offered to keep 500 for herself as compensation, asking if that would be enough. Chen Liuhe says cheerfully that this will certainly be enough and asks to be allowed to take on this task. He says that helping others is his life's work. Walking over to the guy who was still lying on the road, he asked him why he was still lying there and pretending since he already had the money. The girl heard this and was outraged. What she heard really angered her. The girl walked over to the two of them and asked what he had just said. Qin Johan realized that the two of them were in cahoots. But the guy she allegedly hit is outraged by this response and says he was hit for no reason, and now she's speaking up, insisting that his leg is broken. To make it seem plausible, Chen Liuhe claims that he'll take a look. Turning to the victim, he says that if he started putting on a show, he'll have to see it through to the end. The guy asks, puzzled, what he's talking about, and just then Chen grabs his leg and squeezes it with all his might. It looks like he broke it. Because of this, the poor guy let out a loud scream of pain, but our hero didn't think much of it. After all, he'd planned it himself, and now his leg really was broken. When Qin Johan saw this, she was very surprised. She couldn't believe that ordinary con artists were capable of something like that. She says she remembered him, then got into her car and drove away, while the poor guy with the broken leg kept screaming. Chen Liuhe turns to him and asks why he keeps yelling, suggesting that he go to the hospital. After all, he has the money. But in response, he receives threats. The main character isn't the type to be bothered by such trifles. He replies that he knows 3 of his friends are nearby, all while lighting a cigarette. He then adds that since he was able to break his leg with his bare hands, he can do the same to his friends. His face shows confidence. When they heard those words, all 4 of them were very frightened. None of them had any intention of starting a fight with that guy. After that, our hero rides off on his portable bench, feeling completely immune to punishment. When he saw this, one of the guys suggested they catch up to him and beat him up, but it seemed like the other three didn't agree with him. They tell him to cut the nonsense and help them get the injured person to the hospital. They'll deal with him later. After that, we are taken to Bianjo University, a tall, modern white building. This is exactly where the main character speeds up to on his mobile cart. He's going so fast that the dresses of the girls walking by are blown up. It seems that because he was driving so fast, he didn't notice that he'd scratched someone's car. Because of that, the driver got out and started yelling at him, asking where this total jerk had come from. Two guys were standing nearby, staring in amazement at the girl named Shen Qingwu and calling her a goddess. The girl was indeed very beautiful. She had a lovely face and long black hair, and she was wearing a white dress. Chen Liuhe walked up to her and said he was glad she had come. She replied that he was late, and neither of them hid the joy on their faces. Turning to Qingwu, the hero tells her to make herself comfortable, but the girl didn't seem to fully understand what he was about to do. Just as Chen Liuhe suddenly picked up the girl along with her stroller and carried her away, the two guys standing nearby were very surprised. They didn't know how to react. As a result, Shen Qingwu ended up at his street stall. As it turned out, she was under the protagonist's care, and she was the only surviving member of the Shen clan. As he got behind the wheel, Chen Liuhe said he'd made a little money today and suggested they go home for a nice dinner. The girl nodded in agreement. When they get home, the characters find themselves standing in front of a portrait of a man that was on the table. As it turned out, it was the girl's brother. She asked him if he still remembered the promise he had made to their grandfather a long time ago. The guy who had been standing to the side the whole time reassures her that she should stay calm and that he and her grandfather had agreed that he wouldn't set foot in Beijing for 3 years. But Shen Qingwu didn't seem amused by these words at all. Sadness was evident on her face, and she asked what would happen in 3 years and why he still couldn't stop worrying. In response, she hears that he's just an ordinary person, and ordinary people don't forgive anything. Shortly after that, Chen Liuhe's phone rang. He picked it up and said he was a handyman who offered a wide range of home services. In response, the voice on the other end asked him to help with some plumbing. The guy agreed and asked for the address. The woman's voice on the phone sounded very familiar to him, but he couldn't for the life of him remember where he'd heard it before. As Chen Liuhe was leaving, he told the girl that he would be back soon. Shen Qingwu looked very sad. It seemed she didn't want him to leave just yet, and she asked him to be careful. The events take us to the Pear Orchard neighborhood in Hancheng. The guy arrived at the address and rang the doorbell. When the door opened, he was very surprised, and he quickly realized whose voice he had heard on the phone. Standing in front of him was the woman he had cheated out of money that morning. She asked him why he looked so surprised. But the guy wasn't the least bit embarrassed. He replied that it didn't matter who it was. What mattered was whether he had the money. So let's get started right away. Upon entering the woman's house, he notices how beautiful it is. In response, Qin Zhouhan tells him to stop chatting and get to work. The toilet needed to be fixed. Chen Liuhe asks indignantly whether it was really necessary to call him specifically in this situation, since they could have found a repairman, to which the girl retorts sarcastically, "Aren't you a handyman who handles a wide range of household tasks? And if you can't handle this, the false call will be on your conscience." To which the young man, puzzled, replied that he had just started working and didn't understand what false call she was referring to. Qin Zhouhan continued to taunt him, saying that she would demand compensation. Chen Liuhe, realizing why the woman is so angry with him, tries to explain himself and says that he wasn't in cahoots with that guy, and if she wants her money back, she should go after him instead. But that just made her even angrier, and she said in a raised voice that if he couldn't fix her bathtub today, she would take him to court. Deep down, she knew she was getting too angry, and she thought she was really lucky that this guy had come along, someone she could take her anger out on. The guy reacted indifferently and said he didn't care about her threats and that he was leaving. Qin Zhouhan didn't want to let him go just like that, so she started saying that she would report him for trespassing, burglary, or something even worse, since he had come into her house. She really wasn't joking. The woman had already started dialing the police, but just then the guy asked her to stop and said he would do whatever she asked of him. Within an hour, the guy had fixed everything Chin Johan had asked him to, and she, in turn, was surprised at how quickly he'd done it all. But the guy had no intention of working for free and named his price for the job. He demanded 800 from the woman. In response, she protested loudly at the figure Chen Liuhe had given her, even though she knew he was just trying to toy with her. But this game can also be played by two people, so she told him that he had ruined her designer underwear, which she had been drying in the bathroom, and that, taking his wages into account, he owed her 400. Because of this, they started yelling at each other, and each tried to prove they were right. Suddenly, the anger on the guy's face gave way to confusion. He looked out the window, and the girl, not understanding what was going on, asked him what was wrong. A moment later, Chen Liuhe shoves Chin Johan to the floor. At that very second, a bullet flies through the window and shards of glass scatter throughout the apartment. They were both lying on the floor. The woman screamed in fear, but they were both alive. If the guy had hesitated for even a second, things would have been much worse. Looking through the broken window, the young man realized that someone had tried to kill Chin Johan. Most likely, it was a sniper, and he was now somewhere nearby. They were still lying on the floor, surrounded by shards of glass and tools that had fallen out of the bag the guy had been using to fix the plumbing. Chen Liuhe warned the girl that it was a sniper and told her to be careful. Chin Johan was very frightened and couldn't say a word. After that, the gunman, realizing he had failed to complete his mission, begins firing wildly at the windows, shattering them in all directions. At that very moment, the guy grabs the girl without a second thought and, trying to save her, dashes behind the couch. She had been extremely frightened the whole time, so she wouldn't stop screaming. Chen Liuhe had to cover her mouth with his hand to make it harder for the sniper to spot them. After that, the guy poked his head out from behind the couch to assess the situation, and at that very moment, a bullet whizzed past, literally just a couple of centimeters from his head. Realizing how incredibly lucky he was, he hid behind the couch again. As it turned out, the sniper was a true master, and he had nearly maimed him. Chen Liuhe knew he had to find a way to make the shooter lose sight of them, and when he saw the adjustable wrench lying on the floor, an idea came to mind. With a quick lunge, he grabbed the key and in one swift motion threw it at the chandelier, shattering it into pieces. Thanks to his actions, the lights went out in the room where they were, and now it was very difficult for the sniper to spot them. The shooter realized he was dealing with an unusual person who was helping him achieve his goal, so he contacted his team via radio and reported that he was facing unforeseen circumstances and needed a little more time. Realizing that the soldier won't be able to carry out his mission from this vantage point, he leaves. He needs to come up with some other way. Meanwhile, in the dark room, the young man, after assessing the situation, said that it was all over, while Chin Johan continued to sit behind the sofa, terrified. Chen Liuhe, trying to lighten the mood, said that her good looks had even attracted a sniper. But the girl wasn't amused at all. She had only just realized what had happened. After confirming that it was an attack, the guy gathered his tools and was about to leave. He didn't have time to talk. After mentioning that they were lucky, since the sniper hadn't finished the job and they'd managed to survive, the guy said goodbye and headed for the door. But Chin Johan had no intention of letting the guy go so easily. Overcoming her intense fear, she shouted after him and asked him to stop. She never fully came to her senses. Her whole body was trembling, and she clutched her head with both hands. She just couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that someone had tried to kill her. Chen Liuhe just laughed at that and asked why she had been sitting behind the couch for so long, since the sniper had left a long time ago. Chin Johan, however, asked what they should do if he came back. The guy replied sarcastically that, of course, if the killer came back, she'd have to go into hiding again. At that moment, Liuhe noticed that the girl was shaking even more. She was incredibly frightened. The guy wondered what she could have possibly done to make someone hire a sniper to take revenge on her, but Chin Johan just looked away, looking embarrassed and unsure. Chen Liuhe realized she wasn't going to answer and was pretending not to know. He was already about to leave, but just then, someone grabbed him by the jacket. Chin Johan approached him, looking embarrassed, and asked him not to leave just yet. The guy was very surprised by her reaction. He looked at the girl's face and saw tears welling up in her eyes. She was very frightened. After all, Chin Johan says she's very afraid. Chen Liuhe didn't miss the chance to taunt her. noting that all her recent boldness and cunning had vanished in an instant, and now she was begging to stay with her. The girl hadn't expected that reaction. She was both surprised and frightened and didn't know what to do next. Because of the stress she'd been under, she snapped at the guy and yelled at him to get out of her house, saying that if she were killed, it wouldn't be his problem. He'd gotten on her nerves. The guy replied that he didn't care. That same evening, Chen Liuhe and Shen Qingwu were walking down the street. The guy told a funny joke, and they were both having a good time. Everything was just as usual. Suddenly, they notice a woman in an expensive red car. It was Qin Johan. Shen Qingwu asks the guy who she is and if he knows her. Chen Liuhe was shocked. He didn't understand what she was doing there. The young man assumed that this woman was obsessed with him. Trying to avoid a conversation and pretending he didn't know Qin Johan, he quickly took his companion by the arm, but she suddenly asked the stranger if she needed anything. The woman had no intention of just walking away. She continued walking toward the couple with a confident stride, while the guy realized at that moment that there was no way to avoid a conversation. As she approached, she addressed him as Mr. Chen and said she had come to ask for his help in overcoming some difficulties. In response, the guy was surprised and remarked that she had changed her behavior quite a bit and had become more serious. Could this really be because of yesterday's events? Shen Qingwu didn't understand what they were talking about. Qin Johan was annoyed by his behavior. She said she had an important matter to discuss, and that if he helped her, she wouldn't forget the favor. After hearing that, the guy immediately changed his tone. Now he was willing to listen to the woman, because if there's money, there are no problems. So that no one would interrupt them, the three of them went to the nearest cafe. Now they can discuss everything in a relaxed setting. Qin Johan explained that a gang called the Black Dragon wants to take over the business her father owns, and she asks her boyfriend to help her protect her father's property. The woman hands him an envelope and says it contains information about black dragons. The guy replies that he's heard of them, they're very dangerous, and asks why Qin Johan didn't go to the police. She replies that there's no point in that, because her father tried to work something out but failed, and besides, he died in an accident a couple of days ago. These thoughts upset the woman deeply. Everyone around her realized she was in danger, and the young man noticed that they were now closing in on her. Qin Johan understands this and adds that the gang no longer needs shares. Now they want to directly own the establishment, which is valued at 2 million. She's seen information about the guy and knows that he has a combat record and used to be a top-notch bodyguard. She hopes he'll help her. As a reward, the woman offers to cover all of his sister's hospital and living expenses, as well as to resolve the issue with his job. Chen Liuhe pretends that he's willing to take on this job, but not for the money. Shen Qingwu, realizing he's lying, shakes his head in exasperation. Qin Johan was very happy that the guy had agreed. Her face showed her gratitude, and she sincerely thanked him. As she leaves, the woman says they have at most 3 days and need a good plan. Chen Liuhe replies that it's no problem and tells her to calm down. As she was leaving the cafe, Qin passed by a blonde-haired man. He then went into the cafe and addressed Chen Liuhe and Shen Qingwu, calling them little brother and little sister. It was Huan Bai, a good friend and neighbor with whom I could talk about anything. He asked who that beautiful girl was who had just come out of the cafe. The guy, unable to hide the joy on his face, replies that she's just his sugar mama. Bai sees the wad of cash and says that Chen is rich. When he saw that much money, the man asked the young man to let him in on the deal, to which the young man readily agreed, saying they could make that money together. But first, putting on a serious face, Chen says he needs to go somewhere and check on someone. Bai replies with military precision that he's ready. 3 days have passed, and the story takes us to an establishment that the Black Dragon's gang wants to take over. Qin Johan, worried, tries to call Chen Liuhe, but hears that the number she dialed is unavailable. She can't figure out where he's gone. The woman angrily throws her phone on the table. She's furious. Suddenly, an employee rushed in and told her that a man named Joe had brought a large group of people with him and asked her to take a look as soon as possible. She told the waiter to bring all those people to her office and stop panicking, but her face betrayed her anxiety. A gang of thugs stormed into the office, and their leader said they had practically signed an agreement to back down from their demands. But Chin Jo-han, responding to a gangster named Jo Yong-kang, says that this establishment is my father's very flesh and blood, and she cannot simply hand it over to a gang of thugs. The gang leader hints that if she doesn't sign the contract, they always have other ways to force her to do so. At the same time, the villain adds that he's very gentle with women and really doesn't want to do all these terrible things or hurt such a beautiful young woman. Chin Jo-han flies into a rage at such remarks, while Jo Yong-kang, continuing to threaten her, says that if she doesn't care about her own fate, she should at least think about her loved ones, her little brother, for example. The threats against her younger brother are the last straw for the woman. She says that if they lay a finger on him, they won't get away with it. The thug, however, doesn't believe the woman's threats. He just notices that she's very hot and regrets that the old man only wants her to hand over the establishment to them. Jo Yong-kang changed his tone and said that he would count to 3, and if she didn't sign the document, her family would die in that very second. But if she signed in time, she might still receive compensation. After that, the thug immediately began counting from 3. Chin Jo-han was on the verge of losing it. She was seething with rage, but there was nothing she could do. After the villain said the number 2, the woman realized she would have to sign the document, so she began apologizing to her father and brother for failing to preserve the family fortune. When she heard the number 1, followed by a response from Chin Jo-han, she said she was ready to sign the document on the gangster's terms. A satisfied Jo Yong-kang tells her that once she signs this contract, she won't have to worry, promising her and her brother complete safety, and he pushed the sheet of paper closer to her. The next moment, there was a commotion from the side. Someone burst into the room and knocked out one of the thugs, causing everyone present to turn their heads in surprise. The boss's bodyguard took a fighting stance, ready for a brawl. Jo Yong-kang jumped up from the couch. He was furious and couldn't understand who would have the audacity to barge in at such an inopportune moment. It was Chen and Bai. They quickly took care of all the thugs guarding the office entrance. With a smile on his face, the guy remarked that he'd arrived just in time. Chin Jo-han was over the moon. Her bodyguard had finally arrived and she was saved. Jo Yong-kang, clearly annoyed, turned his head toward the woman and asked what all this meant and what was going on. But instead of her, a young man answered. He said he was the vice chair and advised them to stop even thinking about buying the establishment. The gang leader was beside himself with rage. He asked Chen Luhei who he really was and whether Chin's words of consent had been nothing but empty promises. Jo-han whispered to the guy, pointing out that he really had arrived too late and asking what his plan was. Jo Yong-kang, seething with anger, speaks eloquently, but warns that no one should later accuse him of failing to warn anyone about anything. But Chen Luhei asked the thug to stay for a couple more minutes and told him not to rush, since he still had more to discuss. When the villain saw his photos, he got even angrier. He couldn't understand how someone like him dared to undermine him. The guy replied that it had taken him a lot of effort to take those photos, and suggested that the gang member think about what would happen to his standing in the gang if his wife saw them. But Jo Yong-kang tried to pretend that he was in no danger, and that even if his wife found out about his affair, nothing would happen. After that, Chen Luhei pulled out a few more photos showing him with his father-in-law's wife, while sarcastically praising his skills. When she saw this, the gang leader's bodyguard couldn't contain her rage and struck first with all her might. But the guy managed to block the blow. Chin Jo-han was very frightened by this. She hadn't expected such a turn of events. Chen Luhei, after blocking the blow, remarks that it was very powerful and teases the girl, saying that with a temperament like that, she'll have a hard time finding a husband. But there was no time to mess around. After he blocked the punch, he launched a counterattack with his right hand, but his opponent also blocked his punch. The guy's eyes lit up and a smile spread across his face. It had been a long time since he'd faced such a skilled opponent, and he was able to truly appreciate the girl's abilities. Because the opponents were roughly evenly matched, the clash sent them flying apart in different directions. After what had happened, Chen Luhei sat down haughtily on the couch, displaying his superiority, while his rival tried to assess the situation. The guy's behavior really angered her, so she decided to keep fighting and started pulling out her weapon. But at that moment, Chen Luhei raised his hand to signal them to stop, and then he turned to the gangsters and asked them to think it over one more time. Jo Young-kong, mistakenly assuming that the young man is trying to avoid a fight out of fear, wants the deal to go through after all. Well, actually, the guy knew another secret about the gangster, namely that he steals money from his father-in-law, and he suggests discussing all the terms again. The villain wouldn't tolerate such insolence and ordered his bodyguard to beat up the guy so he'd think twice before making such statements. The girl pulled out a knife and lunged at Chen, but he remained just as unconcerned and continued to sit on the couch, merely remarking that her attack was too impulsive. "Calm down a bit," she suggested, and he parried her quick strike with a sharp kick. But this didn't faze her opponent. She quickly regained her composure and launched a second attack. But during her second charge, the guy threw an ashtray at her, and she had to stop in her tracks to fend off such a dirty trick. But just as the ashtray shattered against her arm, Chen was already standing in front of her. She was very surprised by his speed, and a split second later, he struck with all his might. The blow was incredibly powerful. Blood spurted from the girl's mouth. The guy ended the fight with a single well-aimed blow and added that she shouldn't have been waving a knife in his face. After that, he turned to the gang leader and hinted that it seemed he now had the upper hand in the negotiations. But Jo Young-kang saw things quite differently. He gave the young man a condescending look and told him to think it over again. At first, Chen didn't understand what was going on, but when he looked back, he saw the girl he had just defeated getting back to her feet. It was very strange. Usually, after a blow like that, it takes time to recover. Chin Jo-han, watching the whole scene unfold, began to tremble, just as she had that time when an attempt was made on her life. She was very afraid and didn't know what would happen next. Meanwhile, the gang leader's bodyguard got to her feet and pulled out a syringe filled with an unknown liquid, which she injected directly into her leg. The area around it immediately became covered with strange veins. It seemed to be some kind of drug. Chen knew what it was. He calls it the berserker drug. After the jab, the girl makes a quick lunge in hopes of hitting the guy, but he stands there as if he doesn't sense any danger. A few moments later, the girl missed another punch. It was so fast that she didn't even notice when the guy threw it. Just as the girl was falling to the floor, Chen said that the drug wouldn't help her because the difference in their powers was too great. Seeing this, Jo Young-kong completely lost his temper. He pulled out a gun and threatened to kill the young man, telling him that he would die today. But that wasn't meant to happen. With a quick kick, the hero knocked the gun out of the villain's hands and grabbed it himself. After that, he points the gun right at Joe's face and asks how he's doing and when they'll finally be able to have a proper conversation. In response, the gang member asks what he wants. After all, he can't refuse this. He's only the vice president of the Black Dragons gang. To resolve this issue, we need to find the chairman, Chang Yun-fuk. But Chen didn't want to listen to this nonsense. To show how serious he was, he fired his gun, and the bullet whizzed past Joe's head by a centimeter. As it turned out, the bullet had passed so close that it managed to leave a wound on the gangster's cheek. You could tell by the look on his face that he was in shock. After that, the guy says he no longer needs the villain, who in turn asks him to stop and spare his life in exchange for his help. It was clear from Chen's expression that he had no intention of letting Joe go. With a smile on his face, he said that all he could do was help him die. After that, the villain tried to run out of the office, shouting. The hero was very surprised by this and couldn't understand what the villain was doing. A delighted Chin Jo-han thanked the guy for his help and promised to do whatever he wanted. When Chen heard this, he thought she was hinting at something intimate. She replied that he was crazy, but the guy told her not to leave, saying he was just joking. He also added that this was just the beginning. Chin Jo-han looked at him in surprise and asked what he meant, since she thought it was all over. Chen says that Joe won't be of any help to them. They need to turn to Chuk Fuku, and they can't fight with their current forces. They need to make all the necessary preparations in case things go wrong. 2 days later, Chang Yun-fuk invites Chin Jo-han to an unusual restaurant. She hopes they serve delicious food there. They arrived at the restaurant together. The woman looked anxious while the man gave nothing away and appeared calm. They sat down at a huge table in the presence of several guards, and the leader of the Black Dragon clan said he was glad to see them. At the same time, however, he was unhappy that Brother Chen had interfered in their clan's affairs. He noticed that the young man was very self-assured, perhaps even too much so. The hero was truly very confident. Addressing the clan leader, he said that it didn't matter to him who was standing before him. He had come here in the hope of negotiating. Jang Yun says that negotiating in his case is pointless since he has no leverage. He already knew everything he was threatening Zhou with. He turned out to be a coward with no ambition, so he's perfect for the role of a pawn. At least he didn't try to kill Chang Yun and seize the throne. Upon hearing this, Chen says that he'll start by hanging out with regular girls, and after that, he might want to have some fun with the boss's daughter. Unwilling to tolerate such insolence, the security guards pointed their guns at the hero, since in their opinion, he was behaving too defiantly. Even in a situation like that, Chen remained completely calm. The moment guns were pointed at him, he simply lit a cigarette. Chen was shocked by his reaction. The boss told his bodyguards to calm down, since Chen could only talk big while they had real power, but at the same time, he asked the young man if he wasn't afraid of a sudden death. The hero replies that he's afraid, but they won't be able to kill him. Chang Yun, on the other hand, is definitely afraid of dying. After all, he brings so many bodyguards with him to dinner. After Chen's conversation with the mob boss, they exchange threats, each warning the other of the danger. After that, Chang Yun, having assessed the young man's character, offers him a spot in their gang and a huge cut, even more than the money Qin Johan gives him. When she heard this, the woman began to worry, since he was her only hope. But the guy replied that he didn't care about their gang. The mafia boss accepts this answer, but says not to blame him if the talent he was unable to acquire suddenly disappears without a trace, so that no one will ever know. It became clear that he was threatening Chen, saying he would settle the score with him right then and there, and asking if he wasn't afraid of ruining the banquet at his restaurant. Chang Yun is certain that the gunfire at his restaurant will be mistaken for a firecracker going off, and that the bodies of his enemies will be left to the fish, since no one saw them enter the restaurant. Just as guns were pointed at Chen, he remarked that the owner of the establishment was very hospitable, since he had decided to throw them a surprise before dinner. He replies that everything is fine, since they're about to be fed plenty of lead. The very second the gunshots rang out, the young man pushed back the chair Qin Johan was sitting in, thereby saving her. With a deft movement, Chen threw the chopsticks he had picked up earlier and used them to stab the guards' hands, which were holding their guns. But there was a third guard. He approached him from behind, pointed a gun at him, and asked if he really wanted to die there. But the guy masterfully threw him off balance by tossing a half-smoked cigarette at him. The guardian hesitated for just a second, but that was enough for Chen to be right next to him and ready to attack. He grabbed the guard in such a way that the guard couldn't shoot him with his gun. A moment later, with a swift kick, he pushes the man with such force that he knocks down another thug who was standing behind him. Thanks to the successful attack, Chen ended up with the gun he had taken from the gangster, and he fired several shots to neutralize the guards. The guy was confident he would win. He pointed the gun at the boss and told him to listen carefully when he was warned of danger. But Chang Yun wasn't the least bit frightened. His face remained completely calm, and in response, he advised Chen not to die of happiness. After the hero grabbed the thug and pointed a gun at his back, the villain didn't expect such a quick reaction. As it turned out, a sniper had been sitting on the roof of the neighboring house for several hours already. The guy had spotted him a long time ago, and he suggests that Chang Yun let him go, since it's very hot outside. It was clear from the villain's expression that he was in shock. He couldn't understand how Chen had managed to find out there was a sniper on the roof, so he asked him about it. In response, he's told that if the guy were that easy to deal with, he wouldn't have come to him. Chen challenges him to a bet to see who's faster, him or the sniper he hired. At that moment, the villain realized he had no more tricks up his sleeve and would have to come to an agreement. His expression changed immediately, and he clearly became kinder. With his right hand, he signaled the sniper to leave his position. The adversaries exchanged glances. They were both smiling at each other, even though it was clear that they hated each other with all their hearts. Realizing the situation he was in, Chang Yun ordered his bodyguards, whom he called useless pieces of meat, to get out of his office immediately. A moment later, the anger on his face gave way to a smile. He looked at his guests, invited them to sit down, and suggested they get to know each other and discuss business over a meal. The guy happily agreed, After all, that was the only thing he hadn't been trying to achieve all this time. While Chin Johan stood up from the table, looking frightened. Chen was pleased because everything was going exactly as he had planned. The woman looked at him with admiration and marveled at how well everything was working out for him. After dinner, the characters calmly head home in a taxi, and the guy refers to the mafia boss as Boss Chan, as if they were friends. As soon as the car carrying the heroes drove away, the smile on Chang Yun's face faded and was replaced by a look of displeasure. He ordered his subordinate to find out more about this guy, because he wasn't as simple as he seemed. The boss's relative was surprised that all the bodyguards were in the hospital, yet these two had left unharmed, and had even forced his father-in-law to personally drive them away. Chang Yun also asked them to find him the most depraved bastards, since they might still come in handy. If he couldn't recruit Chen, he could just get rid of him. Chen and Chin were on their way home after the negotiations. The woman's face showed that she was worried as she recalled the details of their conversation. During the conversation, Chang Yun insisted that he receive 80% of the profits, since he had done so much for the business owned by Chin's father. In return, he promised not to harm her or her younger brother. He also added that he had nothing to do with her father's death. After all, life is fragile and she couldn't blame him for his death, but it was clear from his expression that he was lying. Chin Johan was furious. Zhang Yong's words about her father had really angered her, but she had no choice. To save her brother, she had to agree to the terms. But Chen Lu tells her not to be upset, because she was able to keep 20% of her earnings from the club, and, on top of that, saved her own life and that of her younger brother. But in response, the woman, with tears in her eyes, reminded him that these monsters had killed her father and were still pretending they weren't to blame. She asked the guy why he hadn't just killed him. The hero says that if he were to kill it, it could lead to countless acts of revenge, and there is no guarantee that the Black Dragon would be destroyed as a result. Chin Johan insists that as long as there's a chance to avenge her father, she doesn't care. She asks where he wants to start. The guy jokes in reply that if she wants him to avenge her father, she'll have to offer him more than just money. Chin Johan didn't appreciate his sense of humor. She asked what kind of nonsense he was spouting. She was in no mood to laugh right now. Her face showed signs of exhaustion and sadness. Chen Liuhe says that Zhang Yang won't just leave them alone and that their agreement is just an excuse. Now they need the right moment to attack. The woman asks what kind of opportunity he's talking about, and the guy clarifies that even the strongest defense crumbles from within. As an option, they could use Zhou Yongkang. 3 days have passed, and the story takes us back to the club owned by Qin. In the office, Huang Bai and Chen Liuhe were having a drink. A colleague praised the young man, saying how generous and smart he was for appointing himself president and making him the head of security. Just then, a guest knocked on their door and asked Chen if he had a little time to spare. It turned out to be Zhou Yongkang this morning. The guy was surprised and asked what had brought him to his mansion. The guest explained that the reason for his visit was that they had recently signed a contract with Qin, and since they were now partners, he had come to pay his respects. Chen Liuhe listened to all of this and realized that Zhou Yongkang had come on some business, but he still couldn't figure out exactly what he wanted. As it turned out, the guest wanted to invite the young man to lunch because he wanted to apologize for his inappropriate behavior. The young man asked if Chang Yun would be there. Zhou Yongkang replied that Zhang Yong wouldn't be there. It would just be the two of them. You could tell from his expression that he had some kind of plan and was up to something. Chen Liuhe agreed. He didn't care about the gangster's schemes. He saw this as nothing more than an opportunity to put his own plan into action. In the end, they went to a local restaurant. Zhou said that this place probably serves the most famous and delicious food in the whole city. The whole table was covered with plates of food. Chen ate as much as he could. The food was so delicious that he wanted to bring his sister here next time. At one point, Zhou got a call on his phone. He told the guy he'd step away for a couple of minutes, and the guy was fine with that. Suddenly, just as Chen Liuhe finished eating, a bunch of thugs burst into the restaurant. There were at least 5 of them, and they were all armed with machetes. It was immediately clear that they had been ordered to kill the guy. The hero had expected this outcome. He just thought they'd started so quickly that he hadn't even had a chance to eat properly. One of the enemies immediately lunged at him with a machete. In response, the young man deftly threw an empty glass using a gnawed bone, and the glass shattered against the attacker's head. After that, two enemies attacked him at once. He was ready to fight, but instead of weapons, he had bones. The thugs attacked from above all at once, but the guy easily fended off the attack with his makeshift weapon. A few moments later, he braced himself and blocked the blow with great force, sending the attackers flying several meters away. It was too early to let his guard down. The gangsters had no intention of stopping. They were closing in from three sides, and Chen realized he was in grave danger. His exceptional agility allowed him to successfully dodge every blow while counterattacking. He was truly very strong. He managed to grab one of the thugs by the neck and throw him to the floor with all his might. After such a hard blow, the man wouldn't be able to recover. Even with that many opponents, the fight was fairly easy for him. What bothered him more was that he had overeaten. He felt like he was about to throw up rice. But there was no time for that. The enemies kept attacking, and this time, one of them was attacking from above. With a deft and swift movement, Chen Liuhe leaped aside a sufficient distance, which allowed him to remain unharmed. After that, the guy decided to counterattack immediately. He closed in on the enemy in a flash and was already poised to strike. His strike was incredibly powerful and hit its mark perfectly, sending the thug flying across the room and crashing into the wall. Just a few minutes later, the seemingly one-sided match had been won with ease. Only Chen Liuhe remained standing. But that wasn't all. Somewhere out there was the person responsible for what had happened here, the one who had invited Zhou Yongkang here. He didn't have to wait long. After the battle, he came over himself and praised the young man. After assessing his fighting skills, he was surprised at how easily the young man had managed to kill his best men. Because the thug had misjudged the situation, Chen Liuhe rushed toward him, ready to take him down right then and there. He punched him in the face. It seemed as though he had poured all his anger into that blow, and as a result, Zhou Yongkang was sent flying several meters and came to a stop only when he hit the wall. The thug hadn't expected things to turn out this way. His face was covered in blood, but Chen Liuhe had no intention of stopping there. He grabbed a machete and approached his enemy. After that, he gave Zhou a choice. Either he explains what happened here, or he loses his own life. In response, the boss's relative asks him not to do that and offers him a spot in their gang. The guy laughed at the suggestion. He couldn't believe this man had the nerve to offer him a partnership after what had happened just a minute ago. Zhou Yongkang, trying to justify himself, says that he misunderstood everything and that everything that just happened here was simply a test of his abilities. The guy didn't believe him. It all seemed far too strange, so he asked why he should trust him and start working with him. As it turned out, Zhou Yongkang had planned to kill his own father-in-law in order to take over the clan. In exchange, he offered to give them all the club's profits and even open a second one. Chen Liuhe had no intention of agreeing to that. He saw no strength in the man now kneeling before him, and wondered if he wasn't afraid that he would simply be turned in. After that, the man jumped to his feet and declared that if his boss saw someone as a threat that could destroy him, he would never let that person live a normal life again. And even if they didn't strike a deal, he would kill him. The two of them had a common enemy, so why not join forces against the Black Dragon clan? It sounds like a good deal. Only by joining forces can they defeat him. Zhou Yongkang urged them to remember that the only way for him to feel safe is to kill Zhang Yong. After hearing all this, the guy says he didn't expect someone who cheats on his wife with his mother-in-law to have such big ambitions. The gangster replies that his father-in-law is a very cautious man, and it's very difficult to plot against him, but now he has an opportunity thanks to the assignment to kill Chen Liuhe. After weighing the pros and cons, the young man agreed to help him. For now, it was the best decision, but he warned Zhou Yongkang that if he betrayed him, he would not survive. In the end, the two shook hands. Who could have expected such an outcome? It looks like something interesting is in the works. Standing in the Black Dragon Garden, Zhou Yongkang reported to his father-in-law that he had done everything in his power to persuade the young man to join his side, but the young man had refused. On top of that, he made up a story claiming that he didn't just hit him, but also slapped him, which means he insulted the entire Black Dragon clan. This story enraged Zhang Yun. He smashed a wine glass and, calling Chen Liuhe a bastard, ordered his men to prepare the prisoners. Jo Yongkang was delighted. The old man had taken the bait, and everything was going exactly according to the plan he had devised. All that was left to do was wait. Meanwhile, Chen Luhe was messing around at the club. It seemed like he'd just been killed in a mobile game, which made him really angry. Suddenly, there was a knock at his door. It was the mailman, who told him that a package had been sent to him. The guy thought it must be some kind of mistake, since he hadn't ordered anything. Maybe it was some kind of surprise from a fan, the guy thought to himself, and happily accepted the package. He was very curious about what was inside, but most likely it wasn't anything good. The courier looked suspicious, and sure enough, as soon as the package was picked up, he ran around the corner and glanced at the timer. It read 0 seconds. It seemed there was a bomb in the package that was meant to kill Chen Liuhe. But something went wrong. The device didn't work, and the man was very surprised. Everything was supposed to go smoothly. Suddenly, he noticed someone who, according to his plan, should already be dead. The hero was standing right in front of him, smiling as he asked who he was and why he had tried to kill him. This killer was no ordinary criminal. He was a true professional who took the lives of a great many people. He was very scared. This was the first time something hadn't gone according to his plan, and now he would have to face someone who wanted to kill him. Chen Liuhe noted that the hitman was very dedicated to his work, but his homemade bomb turned out to be downright childish. At that moment, the enemy, having considered his next move, asked what he was talking about. There was absolutely no time to think. Finally, he makes up his mind and shouting, "Go to hell!" He pulls out his gun and tries to end it all with a single shot. The hero got angry at these games. He was infuriated by opponents who couldn't fight fairly, while the killer, seizing the moment, began to run away. He was terrified when he took on this job. It never even crossed his mind that things could turn out so badly. Chen Liuhe ran after him but fell behind. The enemy turned out to be very fast, but the young man was confident he could catch up to him. After a brief chase, he found himself on the medical floor. Looking around, he scanned the area for his target, but he was nowhere to be seen. Drawing on his unique instincts, which he had honed over many years of working as a bodyguard, he surveyed the area. It paid off. He sensed something and immediately rushed to the suspected location, a look of confidence on his face. When he entered the room he was looking for, he found himself in a massage parlor. It was clear from the employee's expression that something was troubling her. Chen Liuhe immediately realized that the hitman was somewhere nearby. All he had to do was come up with a plan of action. As he closed the door behind him, he struck up a conversation with the client and told her that he was a jack of all trades, including massage. The guy hints that fate itself brought them together and offers to do something special for her. With a glance, the worker signaled exactly where the enemy was. Chen Liuhe continued his performance and waited for the perfect moment. It worked. The hitman fell for it, and just as he was mentally celebrating his victory, a fist appeared right in front of his face. He was very surprised. The situation called for immediate action, and he couldn't think of anything better than to grab the girl and use her as a hostage. After doing this, he starts making threats and says that if Chen Liuhe takes even one more step, he'll put a bullet in that girl's head. But the guy didn't play into his opponent's hands. He just gave him a sarcastic look. It seemed like he knew what he was doing. The killer continued his monologue and ordered the hero to step away from the door, or else he would kill everyone currently in the room. But the guy was unyielding. He said that if he wanted to kill him, he should do it right then, but he would defeat him anyway, and that he had nothing to do with the mercenaries. At that moment, the attacker lost his temper and started yelling that Chen was talking nonsense, ordering him to behave himself since he was already determined enough to kill the hostage. Upon hearing this nonsense, the guy looked at the hitman with a determined look in his eyes and said that if he could really do that, he would have shot the girl a long time ago. In the end, he concludes that this guy is weak both physically and mentally, and that he should put down the gun and find a new job. Hearing these words, the enemy completely loses it, and, shouting that he is one of the best assassins in the world, begins firing wildly at the hero. But the guy was just too good. He dodged every bullet. It seemed like the hitman had emptied his entire magazine. After deftly closing the distance, Chen swings his fist at the enemy with all his might. Just as things were getting really tense, the phone rang, causing the guy, much to the hitman's surprise, to stop and answer it. On the phone, Chen heard that the food delivery service where he'd ordered lunch had run out of his favorite fried eggs, which drove him crazy. After finishing his sentence, he turned his head back toward his opponent, mentioned how lousy food delivery is these days, and suggested they continue. Killer was in shock. This guy had driven him crazy. He just didn't know what to do. All he could do was make empty threats. Chen was tired of listening to this and decided to end it quickly with a single, precise blow, which sent the man flying several meters away. The distraught hostage was finally rescued. She nearly fainted, and it was only the hero's strong shoulder that kept her from falling. By the time everything was over, the allies, Huang Bai and a couple of other guys, had arrived, but help was no longer needed. The neighbor realized that everyone had already made up their minds without them and felt a little embarrassed. This wasn't the first time this had happened. But since the allies had arrived in time, Chen asked them to lead the enemy to the fourth office, where he planned to interrogate him. Upon learning what had happened, Chang Yun was furious. He had spent a fortune and achieved nothing, so the order was given to implement Plan B. At that moment, at the Full Cup Club, two attractive young women walk into Chen's room. One of them says she wants to thank the man who saved her right hand. The guy, whose mouth was full of noodles at that moment, was very surprised. The food got stuck in his throat. Could the girl really be hinting at exactly what he was thinking? The girl immediately sat down next to him and, with an admiring look, began asking him for details about the incident. She was particularly curious to know whether the hitman had turned in his employer, but as it turned out, the police had taken him away before they had a chance to question him. The beautiful woman said it was a shame, but she would buy him a bottle of good wine to cheer him up, and Chen gladly agreed. Another girl thanks the hero once again for what he did. Together, they suggest raising their glasses and making a toast. After the toast, the guy thanks his female companions, and they all drink wine from their glasses together. The girl asks, "The wine really is delicious, isn't it?" But Chen became suspicious. As it turned out, he hadn't actually drunk anything. He'd just been pretending. The guy pretended to fall for the trick and acted as if he believed it, saying that the wine was very tasty. Continuing to play his part, he says he's not feeling well, and the woman, with a calm expression, playfully asks what's wrong with him. In the end, Chen pretends to be fast asleep, and the girl concludes that no matter how strong a man may be, he can't resist a beautiful woman. The guy was sitting on the couch with his eyes completely closed, and the girl was slapping him on the face to see if he was really asleep. She concluded that he was indeed unconscious, but her face showed signs of tension. It seemed as though she was doing all this against her will. She picks up the phone and says she did everything they asked, then asks what she should do next. In response, she's told that she needs to deliver it to the right place. As the conversation continues, the young woman asks what will happen to her husband and child. She is told that once she brings her boyfriend here, they will let them go, just as they promised. Deeply distressed, she hung up the phone, looked at Chen with a very sad expression, and apologized to him. She really had no choice but to do it. The Black Dragons believed everything was going according to their plan. One of them brought the hero, wrapped in a sack, to an underground parking garage. Chang Yun was smoking a cigarette when one of his assistants threw a young man onto the asphalt right behind him. After that, the bag is pulled off the guy's face. The mob boss glances at him over his shoulder and says in a haughty voice, "So here we are, meeting again." Feeling powerful, he kicked the guy in the face, saying what he was about to do, since he was such a tough fighter and wasn't afraid of either killers or bombs. But there was not a trace of fear on the young man's face. He looked confidently at the enemy and asked if he had really sent that assassin, since that was a very foolish strategy. Chang Yun got really angry at this. He started kicking the guy even harder and said that, despite everything, he had him in his power now. The thug thought Chen hadn't expected this, but in reality, the hero had everything under control. Convinced of his certain victory, the villain offers the young man a choice of how he wants to die. In response, he hears that Chen has no intention of dying here, and that he'd be better off worrying about his own life, since he's raised a fine son-in-law. Chang Yun couldn't understand what the guy was talking about. He told him to explain himself more clearly, but the guy just turned away and said that Chang Yun would figure it all out soon enough anyway. Suddenly, the phones of all the gang members in the parking lot rang at the same time. The mob boss flew into a rage when he heard what was said on the phone. As it turned out, his son-in-law had staged a revolt. What's more, he managed to turn half the gang against them, and several units had already been wiped out. Chang-un was incredibly angry. He couldn't believe that this good-for-nothing had dared to go against him. One of the gang members walked up to Chen, kicked him, and tried to find out how long they had been in cahoots. The guy replies that it doesn't matter anymore, and that they're just a bunch of blind bastards who can't see past their own noses. Chang Yun threatens the hero and says he'll never walk again. He calls him naive, because as long as he's alive, the Black Dragon will never fall into anyone else's hands. With a smile on his face, Chen asks what will happen if he does end up dying. But the thug just smirks. He thinks that in this condition, the guy has no chance of standing up to him. In the end, he orders his men to kill him and then dispose of the body. But suddenly, sounds of a fight broke out behind him. Chang Yun couldn't believe his ears. The remaining gang members turned around. They hadn't expected events to take such a turn. The next moment, Chang Yun's men were shot dead, while he himself stared ahead in terror, unable to comprehend how such a thing could be possible. But that was exactly how it was. The hero was standing right in front of him, holding a gun that he aimed at the villain. Smiling, the young man echoes the gangster's own words from a minute earlier, offering him the choice of how he wants to die. Jang Yong says he doesn't care how he dies. The only question is, what will happen to Miss Chin if he dies? As it turned out, he had a backup plan. Chen asked where Chin Johan is right now. In response, he hears that while people are trying to kill him, his men have already captured the woman, and he advises the young man to think things through carefully. If the villain doesn't contact his people within an hour, Miss Chin will die. Just then, the guy got a call on his phone. It was Zhou Yongkang. He asked if they had managed to kill Zhang Yong. Chen reports that he is still alive and that he is holding Qin Johan hostage. After weighing the pros and cons, the hero plans to exchange him for her. In response, Zhou yells into the phone that they absolutely must not do that. If they let the mafia boss go now, they'll never have another chance to catch him. He was furious at the news. It infuriated him that the old man was still manipulating them. After that, his assistant says that he can go and find people who can help with this situation. Zhu agrees. It seems he has come up with some kind of plan that will allow him to kill two birds with one stone. The story then takes us to some kind of abandoned factory. It seems that Qin Johan is being held hostage there. That's exactly how it was. She was sitting on a chair with her eyes and mouth bound, and two thugs were guarding her. One of them looks through his binoculars and tells the other that someone has arrived. As it turned out, the second gang member was the sniper who had been hired to eliminate the woman. He had set his sights on killing Chen. The former sniper picked up his binoculars and looked out the window, where he saw a young man leading an old man whose eyes and hands were bound. He then uses the voice communication system to order his men to go on high alert and cordon off the building. Chen and Zhang walked into the room. Two thugs were shining flashlights at them, and they ordered the guy to remove the blindfold and tape from their boss. He did everything they asked. The gangsters told their boss that it would all be over soon. The hero brought the mafia boss to the specified location. Now he wants to find out where Qin Johan is. One of the gang members tells the other two over the radio to gather at the 6th position and get ready for the deal. But instead of an answer, he hears some kind of noise. The villain tries to find out what happened over there and demands an immediate reply. Looking through his binoculars again, he sees that it was actually Bai standing behind his boss. He had killed two people. The sniper was stunned. He realized it was just a ruse and that the real Chen was somewhere nearby and still had his hands tied. Suddenly, they heard a noise behind them. A moment later, the reinforced door to their room was blown open. When the door fell to the ground, they saw one of their men lying on top of it, with a knife sticking out of his chest. After that, they saw what looked like a grenade in the sky. At that very moment, it exploded and blinded the two gangsters. Since they couldn't see a thing, their only option was to fire wildly into the void, but knives flew toward them in response. Unlike their bullets, these blades hit their mark. As it turned out, the one who threw them was Chen Liuhe. The former sniper recognized the guy right away. The thug realized he was now in a very disadvantageous position, but he still had a backup plan. He quickly rushed over to Qin Johan, grabbed her by the throat, and told the guy to stay where he was. Otherwise, he threatens to kill himself along with her. As it turned out, He had explosives strapped to his chest. The villain repeats once more that the young man must stay where he is, or else they will all die. Chen Liuhe assesses the situation and realizes that it is a remote-controlled explosive. The sniper orders them not to do anything rash, but simply to raise their hands. After all, he has another bomb on him. The hero obeys and raises his hands. First, he had to figure out where the other bomb was hidden. The second thug, who had been in that room, still couldn't recover. He couldn't see a thing because of the blinding grenade. Seizing the moment, Chen grabs his last knife and kicks it toward the suicide bomber. The blade strikes the enemy's hand directly. The detonator flies away, and at that very moment, the hero delivers a powerful blow. The Vril is sent flying to the other end of the room by this attack. It looks like it worked. Chen Liuhe removes the bandages from Qin Johan. She has been rescued. The first thing she sees is a young man telling her that everything is all right, and she thanks him from the bottom of her heart. But that wasn't the end of it. Qin points out that their old acquaintance is still alive. He was standing on his feet and pulling a dagger from his wounded arm. Empty syringes were visible at his feet. The villain says that even though it's not exactly pleasant, this drug is really cool. Chen realized it was the same drug that girl had used. The hero tells Qin to run away quickly and hide somewhere safe. The thug, shouting, "Go to hell!" had already launched his attack. He was very fast, most likely due to the effects of a strange drug. The guy dodges the blow. The floor right beneath him shatters into tiny pieces. The attack was incredibly powerful. Apparently, the substance grants not only speed, but also great strength. The villain immediately prepared a second attack, but Chen decided not to rush and simply took up a defensive stance. He managed to block the blow, but that doesn't change the fact that it was so powerful that the guy was knocked back several meters. The hero decides to counterattack. He grabs the thug's arm. The thug, for his part, wasn't expecting this. The guy's movement was so fast that he didn't even see it coming. Seizing an opening to attack, the guy drove his knee into the enemy's stomach with all his might, causing blood to spurt from the villain's mouth. Chen wants to end it all right here and now. He grabs a knife and stabs the sniper in the chest. It was all over. After that, the guy kept a close eye on the situation for a few more moments. This fight hadn't been easy for him. When Qin Johan saw that the fight was over, she ran over to Chen and threw her arms around his neck. She was very grateful to him. He told her not to be afraid, since everything was fine now, but the woman was very frightened. Suddenly, Chen's phone rang. The voice on the phone told him they were in trouble and that Zhou Yongkang had sent people to kill them. The hero was in shock. He hadn't expected such a betrayal. The situation turned out to be very difficult. The traitor had brought in a large number of people armed with automatic weapons, and they blocked the only entrance to the building. Huan Baiso hid behind a concrete pillar with his hostage and tried with all his might to fight back. Chen Liuhe came to help and asked if his neighbor was okay. The neighbor replied that he was fine and asked what that thing in his hands was. The guy with a smirk on his face says he'll figure it all out on his own soon. The heroes, taking cover behind concrete walls, wonder why, for some reason, the villains have stopped shooting. Zhou Yongkang addressed them over the loudspeaker, telling them to come out and that he wasn't their enemy. He just wanted Zhang Yongfu to die. Chen realizes that the thug is lying because you can never trust a guy like him. Zhou continued the conversation, further urging them to leave the building voluntarily. He said he had simply come to pick them up. Suddenly, the guy says he'll agree to come out, but that he won't get it anyway. At that moment, he throws the grenade he was holding. The gangsters all looked up at once, trying to figure out what was coming at them. Chen tells them to test the power of their own bombs and presses the button, immediately followed by an explosion of immense power. The explosion hit nearly all the villains. They could no longer fight properly. One of the villains tells his boss that everyone has been injured. Zhou Yongkang became very angry because they had used their own bomb against him. The leader hadn't even finished his sentence when the man standing next to him was suddenly shot in the head. Zhou orders the remaining men to shoot Chen immediately, since he is approaching and is already quite close. But they can't do anything. The guy turns out to be much more accurate. He takes out their henchman and points his gun at their leader's head. Saying that it was all over, the hero was about to pull the trigger. But just a second before that, a shot rang out from somewhere else. The bullet struck the young man right in the chest, causing him to bleed. As it turned out, it was the girl with blue hair who fired the shot. The boy fell to the ground from the injury he sustained. Joe couldn't believe his eyes. They had done it. Her bodyguard says they won, and now she's been able to settle some old scores. While raving about how wonderful his assistant is, the gang leader shoves the guy and asks him what happened and why he isn't doing anything anymore. Then something happened that he definitely didn't expect. The guy suddenly grabbed his leg with his hand and knocked him out with a single blow. The girl with blue hair was also puzzled, but just as she turned around, a knife thrown by the hero flew straight at her throat. She falls to the ground, and the guy is glad he was wearing a bulletproof vest and a blood pack. It saved his life. But he wasn't the only one who surprised everyone that evening. The girl who should have already been dead suddenly got up. She had used some kind of substance again. After getting up, she says with a wild look on her face that this new kind of drug is really good. Her eyes were filled with rage. She lunged at the guy and hit him with all her might, but he managed to block the blow. The impact was very powerful. The shockwave spread several meters and kicked up all the dust in the area. The guy dodged the next blow and launched a counterattack with a precise punch to the stomach. Any fighter would have gone down from that blow, but for some reason, she remained on her feet, so the hero decides to strike again. It hit her right in the face, but she remained as unflappable as ever. It seemed as if she didn't feel any pain at all, which really surprised Chen. He realizes things are looking bad. It must be some new kind of drug, so he needs to back off for a while. After making a few successful dodges, the guy waited for the right moment and kicked out. The kick proved to be more effective, and he managed to knock his opponent off his feet. Chen was very tired. This fight was no easy task for him, but there was no time to rest. Another blow came from the girl. The guy doesn't have time to dodge. She's moving too fast, and the blow sends him flying into a nearby parked car. This drug has given her strength and speed far beyond human limits. It will be very difficult for him to win this fight. A moment later, the bodyguard was standing right in front of him. She grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. At that moment, Huanbai ran out of the building. With an automatic rifle in his hands, he said he wanted to help his brother. Unfortunately, however, his accuracy left much to be desired. After firing the entire magazine, he didn't hit a single target. After that, the girl throws Chen with all her might as if he were a sports projectile toward his assistant. She hit the mark, and in the end, both guys were lying on the ground. The hero quickly came to his senses, but things were looking bad. The enemy had brought out a rocket launcher, and he had to come up with a plan fast. Chen notices a pistol lying nearby. He grabs it and fires a precise shot that hits the rocket launcher directly. As a result, the weapon in the girl's hands exploded. She clearly hadn't expected that her own weapon would be her undoing. Finally, it was all over. The guy was sitting on the asphalt, looking wearily at the destruction around him. All that remained was to take the final step. The three of them approached Chang Yun, and Chen told him that the explosion had reduced Zhou to ashes, and now it was his turn. The mob boss says he underestimated the guy, but he shouldn't think he can get away so easily. After all, he has no idea how deep this pond is. Suddenly, the protagonist's phone rang. The voice on the other end said he knew that Chang Yun was in his custody and pleaded with him to let him go. The guy asks who this person is and why he wants Chang Yun to stay alive. The voice on the phone replies that he knows perfectly well who he is. Apparently, it was an old acquaintance of our hero. He offers Chen a deal. If Chen releases Zhang Yang and doesn't destroy the Black Dragons gang, they can become partners, and Chen will receive a lot of money. The young man replied that the offer was very appealing. He knew that the person on the other end of the line was very influential, but Qin Zhouhan didn't agree. The woman, in a rage, tries to wrest the gun from the guy and says that she'll kill Chang Yun herself. She won't let him go under any circumstances. Chen looked at her and asked if she was really willing to go all the way and if she had the courage to kill him. In response, Qin Zhouhan recalls that he is the one who killed her father, and she wants Zhang Yang to pay the same price. Upon hearing this, the guy hands the woman the gun. It seems she has truly found the strength and is determined to go through with it. Realizing that his life might be coming to an end, the mob boss asks her to wait and asks if she knows what kind of person her father really was. In response, the woman says that whoever killed her father has no right to speak ill of him or insult him. But Chang Yun went on to say that if she didn't believe him, she should go back and ask her vice president about it. He insisted that she knew nothing about her own father. Chin Jo-han fell deep in thought at those words. What the mafia boss had said had left her confused, and the thought that he might be telling the truth flashed through her mind. After that, Chang Yun turned to Chen Liuhe and advised him to listen to the person on the phone, because otherwise he would get into serious trouble. But the guy wasn't scared at all. He turned his head toward the villain and simply told him to shut up. He then took the gun from the woman and, saying that a person who commits a crime for personal gain does not deserve to live, pointed the barrel at Chang Yun. And finally, he pulls the trigger. The bullet hits the enemy right in the forehead, and the enemy falls dead. On the phone, Chen Liuhe told the man that he had accidentally lost control. In response, the voice laughed and said, "So be it, but now the young man's death is inevitable." He hung up the phone and told Chin Jo-han Soo that this way she wouldn't get her hands dirty. In response, the woman said she was too weak. That's why she needs someone like him. She agrees, but says she needs to become stronger. The woman asked him to stay with her so that he could witness her transformation. You could tell by the look on her face that she was serious. It was clear from Chen's expression that the hero agreed. They shook hands, and he said that he would be a good person until the very end. After that, the guy asks how she'll thank him, hinting at something unusual, and Chin Jo-han replies that she'll give him a promotion and tells him to close his eyes. He did everything just as she told him, but he wondered why he suddenly smelled smoke. When he opened his eyes, he saw Huan Bai coming toward him, trying to kiss him. He didn't like that joke, so he punched his partner in the face. After that, the guy suggested they forget about it and get out of there as soon as possible. Their plan was to take the remaining shares and resources of the Black Dragons and use them for the greater good. He assumed that the person on the phone was the real owner and that the Black Dragons were actually just their pawns. The story takes us to the Full Cup Club, where Chen and Chin were discussing business with a man. It was Xu Shirong. He had been appointed the new leader of the Black Dragons. He was very grateful and said that from that day on, he would do whatever they told him to do. Continuing the conversation, the woman said that they would not force him to commit crimes and that, as long as they worked together, he didn't need to worry about making a living. To celebrate, the new leader of the Black Dragons gang makes a toast and invites everyone to drink. He also took a gift out of his jacket pocket. It was a business card. Everyone listed on it was rich and famous. As Xu Shirong said, this is a great opportunity to meet remarkable people, and the heroes accepted this gift. Chen Liuhe thanked him for the gift and said that the map would still come in very handy. He also asked Xu if he knew who was behind Zhang Yong. At first, the man didn't understand what was being talked about, but then he remembered that his boss had once said he was in contact with a certain person whom no one had ever seen. Chen Liuhe immediately realized that this was the very same person he had spoken to on the phone. He had asked Xu to let him know if that person contacted him. After that, the guy asks the woman if she's heard anything about her vice president, but she replies that he's most likely run away. Thinking it over, the guy concludes that he couldn't have gotten very far, and since he only found out about what happened that evening, Chin Jo-han is afraid he might come back and cause trouble. Chen confirms the woman's fears and says that the rat won't just give up what he had so easily. Chin wants to find this person, but the protagonist asks to put that off for now. For the moment, he wants to talk about tomorrow. In response to the puzzled looks on his friends' faces, the guy brings up the question of what to wear tomorrow. Shopping turned out to be not such an easy task. They'd been shopping for a full 5 hours already, and Chen complains that going shopping with a woman is awful. Out of the corner of his eye, the guy heard a strange couple, and just then, Chin told him to try on a suit. Reluctantly, the guy agrees and goes into the locker room, while the woman continues to look at some other options. Suddenly, a strange guy approaches her. Calling her a beauty, he asks if he can know her name, since he can't take his eyes off her charm. But Chin Jo-han didn't appreciate his efforts, and simply remained silent. The blonde guy figures she's probably just shy. Thinking himself irresistible, he steps closer and puts his hand on the woman's shoulder. In response, she asks him to step back. Chen, who had just stepped out of the fitting room, saw this, and immediately came to his girlfriend's defense, grabbing the man by the arm. Bondin was furious. He wasn't used to being treated that way. The man asked the young man who he was and how he dared to bother him. The protagonist ignores him, but this only makes the man even angrier. He decides to fight back and attacks him from behind. But the guy dodged the blow without even looking back. The man tries to kick him, but he again deftly steps aside. This situation pushed the blonde man and himself over the edge, and he lunged at Chen with his fists, but no matter how hard he tried, not a single punch landed. In the end, he got tired. The man couldn't figure out how the guy was doing it, and the protagonist teased him, saying that if he got the suit dirty, he'd have to pay for it. Those words gave the blonde man the strength for one more punch, but Chen had run out of patience and knocked the upstart out with a single blow. The blow was hard. The man started bleeding from his nose, and when he realized he had lost, he began making threats, claiming that he was from the influential Wang family. The story then takes us to an office where a man named Wang Qin-lung is sitting. He is the chairman of the Wang Group. Suddenly, a young, pretty secretary rushed into his office and told him that his young boss was in trouble. She showed Wang Qinglong a video of Chen beating up his son. The scene sent the man into a rage. It seems this guy with blue hair has had enough of life. The secretary says she found this person and warns that if this video ends up online, her boss will lose face. He tells the girl not to worry and that he'll figure it all out, after which she agrees and leaves. The man found out everything he could about the hero, and in his monologue he says that there is a path to heaven and hell, but the guy isn't going anywhere because he's going to die tomorrow. Meanwhile, after shopping, the couple stopped by a restaurant for lunch. Qin calls out Chen, pointing out that he's behaving inappropriately and asks him to conduct himself properly now that he's alone with the girl. In response, the guy says that shopping with her was more exhausting than a marathon, and now he has to make up for it with a good meal. With his stomach full to bursting, a satisfied Chen leaned back in his chair, while Qin said that he didn't even know how to flirt, which meant he didn't deserve this meal. At that moment, it was as if a switch had flipped in the guy. He immediately became much more serious. After that, he took the girl by the hand and said that before she came to him, his life had been like a pool of stagnant water, until she appeared like a star in the sky that shines brighter than the sun. Qin Zhouhan was charmed by those words. She realized she had been very wrong when she said the guy didn't know how to flirt. Continuing his speech, the protagonist says that she is not like the stars in the sky, but she is firmly etched in his heart. The girl gazed at Chen with enchanted eyes. He concluded by asking if she, as his beloved, could bring this dinner to a close. At first, Qin didn't understand what he was talking about. As it turned out, he had simply asked her to pay the dinner bill. Qin got really angry. She grabbed a chair. At that moment, she wanted to smash that fool's head in. After that, they drove home. It was already evening outside. In the car, the protagonist tried to explain himself, saying that it was just a bill she had paid. Suddenly, he notices an SUV in the rearview mirror. The car had been following them for quite some time, and Chen realizes that someone has been tailing them, and has been doing so for quite a while. Suddenly, the SUV began to pass another vehicle. As it turned out, there were 4 heavily armed soldiers inside. Sensing danger, the young man makes a decision and turns the steering wheel, causing the car to crash through the guardrail and veer into the woods. When the mercenaries saw this, they asked their boss what to do next, and he told them there was only one option. They had to follow them. Upon hearing the order, the soldiers all get out of the vehicle and head into the forest in pursuit of the fleeing heroes. One of them, who was leading the way, warned the others that the target was a sharpshooter and a skilled fighter, and that he would do anything to achieve his goal. The car carrying the guy and the girl pulled over nearby in the woods. Qin, who hadn't noticed they were being followed, asked what the hell he was doing. She got scared and mistakenly assumed that Chen intended to do something indecent to her, since there was no one else around. The hero replies that someone will be here soon, so she should stop making things up. He promises not to do anything strange. Meanwhile, the mercenaries spotted a car that was presumably carrying a young man and a young woman, and they silently approached it from behind. They decided to split up. 2 of them went to the car, one climbed a tree, and another hid in the bushes. As one of them approached the car, he quickly opened the door and pointed a gun inside. He shouted, "Don't move!" But there was no one in the car. Suddenly, there was a rustling from behind the bushes. One of the mercenaries turned around, and at that very moment, he was struck from behind. It turned out to be Chen Liu. With a single blow, he knocked the enemy unconscious, then grabbed his pistol and fired at the soldier in the tree. The guy was a very good shot, so his bullet hit its target and the enemy fell to the ground, while the hero kept firing. While fending off 3 enemies at once, he picks up his cell phone and appears to be sending some kind of signal. That was indeed the case. He gave some kind of signal to Chin Johan, who was standing somewhere behind him at that moment, holding a rope in her hands. The next moment, she pulled on it, and at the other end of the rope, the trap they had set together earlier sprang into action. One of the enemies fell for it. He turned around and, mistaking the cardboard cutout for the attacker, started shooting at it. At that very moment, Chen approached him from behind and pointed his gun at the back of his head. Only then did the mercenary realize he had been tricked. The guy ordered the soldier to slowly lower his weapon. He wanted to ask him something. But suddenly, out of nowhere, another enemy appeared, and this time he pressed the barrel of his pistol against the hero's temple. Things were looking bad. His companion was also found and arrested, and the situation took an unexpected turn. The guy realizes he's in deep trouble. He needs to quickly come up with a plan to save himself and Chin Johan. The mercenary tells Chen to drop his weapon and raise his hands, otherwise he cannot guarantee this beautiful woman's safety. At that moment, the villain was overjoyed. He was happy because he had put on his best bulletproof vest, which saved him from a direct hit. Realizing that the odds were not in his favor, the hero raised his hands. At that moment, it was the best decision he could make. Meanwhile, one of the mercenaries tries to contact the other, but he doesn't respond. Everyone around them thinks he's dead. But nobody really cares about that, because the fewer people there are, the more money each of them will get. Besides, the boss only needed a guy, and the girl might come in handy for something else. Chen Liuhe, standing with his hands raised, asks who sent them here. In response, he hears that no one knows. All they can say is that it was one of the bigwigs. As soon as the villain tried to grab the gun from the guy's hands, he immediately knocked his opponent off his feet with a deft move. Then you grab him by the arm and deliver a fatal shot right to your opponent's head. The rest of the gangsters, calling him a bastard, start firing wildly at him. The only thing that saves the guy is the body of the enemy he killed. After waiting for the right moment, the hero raises his pistol and fires several precise shots. Fortunately, those shots hit their mark. He took out 2 mercenaries at once, and the girl was unharmed, though frightened. She didn't open her eyes until a few seconds after the shots were fired. Beads of sweat appeared on her face. She was very frightened. Well, everything had already been settled. The guy told her to relax and get out of there quickly. They got back into their car and headed home. This time, Chin Johan was behind the wheel. At that moment, Chen was sitting in the seat next to her, trying to do something with his 2 phones, but he wasn't having much success. The girl was trying to calm him down. Chin Johan apologized for getting him into trouble again, since they had only agreed to help with the black dragons. Chen replies that she really is a disaster. The girl clearly wanted to hear a different answer. Even though things weren't looking too good for the guy, you could still see a smile and confidence on his face. After all, he is no coward, and he has the strength to destroy anyone who tries to deceive him or harm him in any way. The girl notices that he really does seem almost inhuman, yet he happily stays with her. The hero teases her once again and says he wouldn't mind having some fun with her. After that, he deservedly gets a slap in the face, along with the remark that now is no time for silly jokes. Chen makes excuses and says it's just a joke, and she herself understands why he's still helping her. The reason is pretty simple. They're using each other. He protects her, and she takes care of him. In reality, it's all just part of the guy's preparations for his trip to Beijing. He promises to return to Beijing in 3 years and make those bastards pay with their own blood. They continued driving along the road at night and arrived home an hour later. Back at home, the 3 of them gathered around the computer and, using one of the mercenaries' phones, tried to pry information out of the client. To be honest, Shen Qingwu handled all of this, while Chen provided moral support. At some point, the sister got fed up with her brother's silly behavior, and she did what she'd been wanting to do for the past few minutes. He really did deserve it. After several hours of trying to hack into it, we could finally say that we'd succeeded. Thanks to Shen Qingwu's brilliant abilities, she was able to determine the location of another phone by extracting data from several phones. Thanks to this, they were able to identify an address in the northern part of the city. The order to carry out the murder most likely came from there. Late at night, they arrived at the location, which turned out to be an upscale neighborhood. When he reached the door with the right number, the guy couldn't wait to find out who was actually behind the curtain. At the address they managed to track down was a luxurious mansion with security guards. As he got closer, the young man could make out a conversation between two security guards. They were talking about the weather and an upcoming thunderstorm. Chen stood by the fence, assessing the situation. He had managed to find out that two security guards were stationed by the door and that there were other bodyguards at the villa. After contacting his sister by voice call, he asked if the target was still at the villa. Chen confirmed that the phone was still there. The guy was thrilled to hear this. He was hoping he'd catch that guy today, since he wasn't used to people staring at him as if he were a victim. Suddenly, in the ear where he was wearing an earbud, he heard a voice he hadn't expected to hear at all at that moment. It turned out to be Xu Shirong. He said in a frightened voice that they were in trouble because all of the Black Dragon's property had been stolen. The puzzled hero tried to figure out who could have done it, but there was no information yet, although there were a couple of leads. Xu Shirong said he would start looking into it right away. The crime scene was a mess. They even killed the janitor. Chen asked if there might have been any other clues at the crime scene. According to the clan's new leader, all the hard drives and safes were gone, and on top of that, a photo of the guy had been pinned to the wall with a knife. The hero tells him to start figuring it out on his own and that he'll join him once he's finished with work. Just then, thunder rumbled in the sky and a huge bolt of lightning struck. The boy couldn't help but think that it seemed they were hunting him again. He speculated that all these events were connected and that he might be able to find the answer tonight. He had to act without delay, so with a deft leap he cleared the high fence and found himself on the mansion's grounds. Thanks to his exceptional speed, he managed to run past the guards unnoticed. Because they weren't paying attention, they didn't notice a thing. They just kept smoking and chatting about trivial matters. But suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a knee to the face of one of them. They clearly hadn't expected anything like that. The second security guard immediately drew his gun and started shooting at the uninvited guest. But, much to his regret, the guy turned out to be quite agile and dodged the bullets, and then knocked him out with an elbow strike. After taking out the two security guards who were guarding the main doors, the guy paused for a second to see if they had noticed him. Inside the mansion, in his study, Wang Qinglong was sitting with a woman he called Lan Feng when he heard a gunshot and was startled. The woman with short hair told him not to worry, since he had already paid for everything and her people would take care of the troublemakers. She ordered one of her subordinates to go and see who dared to come to this house uninvited. Meanwhile, the guy made his way through the house. Without much trouble, he took out one security guard after another. Suddenly, as he approached the glass door, he sensed danger. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a huge silhouette behind the glass. A few moments later, a massive fist smashed through the glass door in one swift motion, narrowly missing Chen. After a failed attack, the enemy behind the door kicks the other half of the door out with a single powerful kick. It turned out to be a tall, large man with scars on his face. He turned to the protagonist and asked why he was still alive. When he heard this over the intercom, the homeowner was genuinely terrified. He thought the guy had been dead for a long time, and that the voice was ordering the girl to come to him. In response, she says she doesn't like being told what to do, and if he dares to come to their door, she'll give him a piece of her mind. After that, Lan Feng tells his subordinate to kill the hero, to which the subordinate replies that he can do it easily, and it won't take him more than 3 minutes. Chen Liuhe asks the man who he is and why he thinks he has what it takes to defeat him, but all he hears in response are more threats. The guy reacted calmly. It looks like he'll have to make that upstart change his tune. The rivals stood facing each other, each preparing for a fight that could end in the death of one of them. The young man made the first move. He lunged forward sharply, trying to land a blow to the man's torso, but the man easily blocked the strike. But the guy wasn't about to stop there. He still had plenty of energy left, and he kept launching rapid attacks against his opponent. The villain turned out to be no ordinary foe. He easily parried and dodged all of Chen's attacks, biding his time until the right moment to strike. At one point, after another sharp turn, the man held up a single finger. He was trying to provoke the guy by treating him like a child. He kept doing it. It seemed his plan was to rile the hero up. Chen wasn't the type to fall for such simple tricks. Keeping a cool head, he continued his attempts to strike down the villain with his blows. But suddenly, the thug grabbed him by the knee and effortlessly hurled him all the way up to the ceiling. The enemy turned out to be very strong. After missing the shot, the guy falls to the floor along with the chandelier he knocked down with his body. The hero knows he's stronger and more resilient than this guy, but the situation makes it hard for him to fight. It was too dark around them. Because of this weakness, he only realizes at the last moment that the enemy has practically already struck him with his massive fist. Unfortunately, Chen doesn't have time to dodge. The force of the blow sends him flying several meters and he crashes into the coffee table. That was very unpleasant. He needed to take some action if he wanted to win this confrontation. Don't forget that this guy is exactly the kind of person who can find a way out of any situation. He picked up an iron bar off the floor, and that was enough to turn the fight in his favor. Using his unique intuition, he waits for the perfect moment to make his next move. Having done everything as he should, he swings his weapon in the hope of striking the enemy and inflicting irreparable harm on him. And then something unusual happens. The blade cuts his armor in half, and Chen tries to figure out whose weapon it is. The blade turned out to be not only very hard, but also incredibly fast. It was only thanks to his agility that the hero was able to dodge it. After that, pausing for just a moment, the hero notices someone behind him. How on earth did that person end up behind him? A punch to Chen's face followed immediately. He couldn't keep up with his second opponent. That sent him crashing back to the floor. It was probably the toughest mess he'd ever found himself in. Anger was written all over his face. He didn't like that such underhanded fighting tactics were being used against him. As a result, he found himself in a situation where any wrong move could have been his last, with two very powerful enemies standing right above him. The man with the blindfold realizes that 3 minutes have already passed, which means the big guy's time is up. Now it's his turn. With a smile on his face, he promises that it won't even take him 3 minutes. 2 will be more than enough. But Chen had no intention of giving up. He realized that the biggest mistake in a fight is to misjudge an opponent's strength. He was tense, sweat was trickling down his face, and he had to focus completely because his enemy was unusual. It was very dark all around. Light entered the room only for a few seconds at a time when lightning struck, and it was at just such a moment that the guy noticed the attack. Judging by the man's appearance, the darkness in the room did not seem to bother him at all. He was most likely blind. However, this did not prevent him from launching swift attacks with his sharp blade. The hero barely managed to dodge them. Chen decides to use the gun, figuring that if his opponent can't see him, he won't realize that Chen has drawn it. But somehow, incredibly, the man with the blindfold realized that the hero had drawn his gun, and that's why he remained unharmed. Immediately after successfully dodging the attack, his opponent swung his blade in a sweeping horizontal strike. Chen had to fight hard to save his life. Leaning on his arm, he shielded himself from another attack with his pistol. He was in a very poor position. Somehow, though, he manages to punch the swordsman in the face, which buys him a couple of seconds. Seizing the moment, the guy jumps back and gets to his feet. He still has a few rounds left in his pistol's magazine. The hero aims the barrel at the opponent and fires a large number of shots. It seemed as though they were heading straight for the target. In a few moments, it was all set to end in a victory for Chen. However, the enemy had other ideas. He managed to dodge one bullet, and thanks to his incredible skill, he deflected the other with his sword. This man was a true master of his craft. To this day, the hero still doesn't understand how he manages to anticipate the bullet's trajectory even though he can't see. The scene was mesmerizing. Two incredibly talented fighters stood facing each other in a dark room, illuminated only by flashes of lightning. The swordsman was in a hurry, because the 2 minutes he had set aside for the murder were about to run out any second now. Chen fires again, but the bullet once more flies treacherously wide and hits a concrete wall. The next moment, the guy senses the enemy behind him for the second time in a short span of time. The swordsman leaped out of the darkness and poured all his skill into that strike. He was certain it would be the winning blow. But his blade was not destined to reach the hero. Instead, the villain felt a searing pain in his chest. It was a bullet. As it turned out, the guy fired a shot discreetly through his jacket at just the right moment, right in the middle of the enemy's attack. Lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood, the swordsman tried to find out from the young man how he had figured out which way to shoot. Chen didn't actually know exactly where to aim, so he simply lured the villain to the right spot. He did this by firing shots. Once he realized this, the man with the headband realized his mistake and became very angry. He was curious as to why the guy had let him sneak up behind him and attack him. The answer was that the swordsman's hearing and perception were too keen, so the hero had no choice but to rely on luck. But the enemy was not satisfied with that answer. He had to know the reason for his defeat before he died. Chen tested the limits of his opponent's abilities using bullets. This allowed him to find a weakness in his opponent's defense, but it cost him 4 shots. The hero didn't have time to chat any further. He finished off the swordsman and moved on. He still had a lot to do. There was absolutely no time to rest. Immediately after defeating the swordsman, a bruiser attacked him with a powerful blow from above. The guy jumps out of the way at the last second, and the blow hits the stone wall, which shatters into tiny pieces. Seizing the moment, Chen fired at the villain. This time, the bullet quickly hit its target and blood spattered all around. The thug was talking about revenge and killing the guy, but he was covered in blood. He'd probably already lost. A second later, he falls to the stone floor. Apparently, those words about avenging his brother became his dying words. Chen recognized the 2 brothers' abilities, but they were still too weak to stand up to him. Suddenly, as a bolt of lightning struck, the young man once again had the feeling that someone was standing behind him. He was a hulking guy. He managed to grab the hero by the throat and started choking him, and the guy couldn't believe his eyes. The giant had the gaze of a wild beast. It seemed as if his eyes were ablaze with a bright flame, and the only word that came from his mouth was revenge. With his last ounce of strength, the guy raised his right hand, the one holding the gun. He was almost out of breath, so he had to act fast. He managed to do it after all. He was able to shoot his opponent right in the head. The thug fell onto his back. A bullet had gone right through his head, but Chen wasn't in a hurry to lower his gun. You could expect anything from this guy. After that, the hero dropped his gun. He was out of bullets anyway, and was shocked by just how tough his enemy was. He was still able to keep fighting even after being shot in the chest. Meanwhile, in Wang Qing's office, Lan Feng was finishing another cigarette. She was clearly very annoyed. Wang Qing packed his suitcase himself. It looks like he put the things that were important to him in there. He picked it up and walked over to his bodyguard. Once they were sure everything was all right, the man was ready to leave. But suddenly, the woman pointed the gun at the very person she was supposed to protect. It was unexpected. He had paid her a lot of money. As it turned out, she was furious that her 2 brothers had died defending a monster like him. That loss was beyond monetary measure. In response, the man points out that they simply misjudged their strength and that she shouldn't put all the blame on him. She can't just kill him like that. The woman was holding a loaded pistol with her finger on the trigger. At that moment, she was deciding whether to let Wang Qing live or not. In the end, she calms down and lowers the gun. The man lets out a sigh of relief. It looks like he'll be around for a little while longer. But suddenly, Lan Feng gave a command to her dogs, and they reacted immediately. A second later, 2 ferocious beasts were standing right next to her. Wang Qing was scared out of his wits. His mind began to conjure up the most horrific scenarios of what would happen in the next few minutes. After that, the woman gave another command, and the 2 vicious dogs began to walk slowly toward the man. Realizing that he is in mortal danger, Wang Qing asks Lan Feng to reconsider, because if she kills him, she herself will be in danger for the rest of her life. But it was already too late. The 2 beasts pounced on the man, biting him repeatedly with their sharp fangs. A few minutes later, the victim stopped struggling. His body lay on the floor, completely covered in blood. All this time, Lan Feng had simply stood there watching the scene unfold. From the outside, it looked very eerie. When it was all over, she simply gathered her things and, saying that she hadn't killed anyone, got ready to leave. She took a suitcase with her. As it turned out, it contained vials that most likely held drugs. But suddenly, one of the dogs heard a noise coming from the hallway. He started barking loudly. The dog sensed danger from whoever was gradually approaching their room. As it turned out, it was Chen Liuhe. He had walked into the room hoping to finally find out who had been making his life miserable all this time. The first thing he saw was Lan Feng. Their eyes met, and she pulled the receiver out of her ear. It would get in the way during the fight. Both of them knew that a fight was inevitable. As soon as the receiver was in her hands, she crushed it in a fit of rage. Lan Feng promises the guy she'll make him pay dearly for killing her brothers. The hero was surprised by the scene in the room. He couldn't understand why they were fighting each other. After that, he noticed the safe and the hard drive, the very items that had recently been stolen from the Black Dragon clan. The guy realized he was at the right address. He was going to unleash all his hatred, even if a woman stood in his way. Lan Feng paid no attention to this nonsense. Instead, she ordered her loyal hounds to attack Chen. In that very second, they pounced on the guy. They seemed even angrier than usual. The hero was startled. He hadn't expected at all that his rival was the owner of 2 rabid dogs. Luckily, he had grabbed a knife from the guys he'd been fighting with earlier. People use knives like that to fight lions in Africa. He tried to fend off the 2 enraged animals, which were ready to tear him to pieces, with that huge knife. But at that very moment, Lan Feng wasted no time in pulling out his gun and shooting the young man in the right hand. He could no longer hold the knife. Because of this, the protagonist falls to the floor, and the 2 dogs pounce on him and start biting him with all their might. The animal's bites were very severe. He started bleeding immediately and tried to fend them off with his fists. Suddenly, one of the dogs lunged at his most vulnerable spot. Chen had to act immediately. With a quick, deft movement, the guy used both feet to grab the dog by the throat. It was the only way he could subdue it. Then he punches her as hard as he can, because biting her there is really mean and rude. By some incredible miracle, he managed to fend off those 2 frenzied creatures. That was just the beginning. Right after that, he was hit by 2 shots, one in his right arm and one in his left. Lan Feng kept shooting farther and farther away. Her anger didn't subside for even a second. More than anything else in the world, she wanted to get rid of Chen. The guy could barely keep dodging her shots. He'd have to try really hard to survive the situation. Although the woman had run out of ammunition, the rage on her face burned just as brightly as it had when she first learned of her brother's deaths. Even without bullets, she posed a serious threat. The 2 dogs had already regained their composure and were ready to attack again. The guy got back on his feet. Even though the bullet wounds didn't damage his bones, they're hindering his movements, so he'll only be able to pull off this one trick. He stood at attention and stuck his finger into his shoe. He was waiting for the moment when the dogs would get as close to him as possible. As it turned out, his trick was to attack the dogs with his feet, which were wearing socks he hadn't washed in at least a month. Strange as it may seem, it worked very effectively. Both animals were neutralized, while Lan Feng watched the whole thing with disgust. That wasn't enough for the guy. Those animals had really pissed him off, and he was going to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. Holding his socks in his hand, he set off in pursuit, while the dogs ran away from him as fast as they could. But they weren't able to get very far. Now they've been neutralized for a long time. After that, Chen turns to the woman and with a defiant look challenges her to a fight, which is exactly what Lan Feng wanted. With a look of anger on her face, she was the first to go on the attack. She was very skilled at kicking. They were very fast, but the guy was good too. He dodged the first blow with ease. The woman's subsequent strikes also failed to hit their mark. Chen deftly dodged them all. But as it turned out, all those blows were just meant to distract the hero. Suddenly, the woman struck from above. It was clear from Lan Feng's expression that this was an unusual strike, and that it didn't end with a simple leg movement. As it turned out, a blade as sharp as a razor was hidden in her shoe. It came to a stop just a centimeter from the guy's eye. He managed to block the blow, but he took a huge risk. It was just a hair's breadth away from his face. To save himself, the young man makes a desperate decision and grabs the blade with his teeth. Suddenly, the opponents locked eyes. The woman turned out to be an incredibly skilled fighter. It looked as though she was about to strike with her other leg. That was indeed the case. Chen could only manage to block her quick, sharp kicks. At one point, Lan Feng was completely in the air. Her fighting technique was very unusual. Despite this, the hero managed to fend off all her attacks and push her away. But as she retreated, her opponent managed to slash the guy's chest with her hidden blade. The wound was extremely painful. At that very moment, Lan Feng was preparing to launch another attack. Her face showed confidence. She was certain she would win. The woman immediately launched an attack. Her movements were so fast that even Chen couldn't keep up with them. All he could do was block her strikes. This time, it was a kick with her right leg. A left-handed punch followed immediately after. At that moment, the guy wasn't sure he'd have time to block it. But he managed to do it anyway. He felt a sharp pain. As it turned out, the blow was not only sudden, but also powerful. That wasn't all. With a deft movement, the woman grabbed the hero's arm and squeezed it as hard as she could. She managed to get the guy in a hold. It was very dangerous for him. A move like that can be deadly. What's more, it was an unusual, special royal cross grip. According to Lan Feng, no one had ever managed to break free from it. The hero was furious. No one had ever managed to put him in such a position before, and he couldn't believe a woman was capable of such a thing. At that moment, Chen became truly enraged, and he put all his strength into fighting the enemy. After all, he was even stronger than he might have seemed at first glance. He was able to lift a woman off the ground with just one hand. After that, he threw her to the floor with all his might. She was unlikely to recover quickly from such a blow. The young man assessed Lan Feng's moves, but realized that they wouldn't work against a truly powerful opponent. He tied the woman up because he didn't want to leave until she apologized to him. At the same time, on the other side of town, a man showed up once again with a bouquet of flowers. From a conversation between two female employees, it becomes clear that this is one of the 7 chows. This isn't the first time he's brought a bouquet of flowers to a woman named Wang Jin. It's also clear from their conversation that his younger brother is a spendthrift who is bedridden. At one point, there was a knock at Wang Jin's door. She told the person to come in while the girl was busy with some papers. Her secretary said that a man had come to see her with flowers yet again, but she doesn't want to see him and asked her to tell him she isn't here. The secretary had no choice but to follow the order. She was a little wary of this man. He seemed a bit gloomy to her. In response, Chow says that the roses with thorns are more fragile. He asks them to take them back and hints that he'll come back next time. As soon as he stepped out of the building, someone called out his name right away. Someone really wanted to meet him. As it turned out, it was a girl with red hair. It seemed she really liked him, and she asked what made that woman in the office better than her. Upon hearing this, Yunzi asks his companion for a small favor. As soon as she heard this, the girl was overjoyed. She was ready to do anything for her beloved. After that, he doesn't go into the company building. That building was owned by this man's family. Once inside, they took the special elevator reserved for VIP guests. Strange as it may seem, they didn't go up but down. The girl was very surprised. She hadn't known the building went so deep underground. After that, the man took her by the hand and led her forward. He asked if he could show her something nice. When they arrived at the right floor and stepped out of the elevator, the girl found herself standing on a glass floor, which startled her. Further down was a huge enclosure where several African lions lived. Yunzi says these lions are his pets, while his companion, trying to hide her fear, says she really likes them. After that, the man says he's very touched that she's willing to do this for him, but the girl doesn't understand what he's talking about. Suddenly, the ground disappears beneath her feet, and she begins to fall. At that moment, her whole life flashed before her eyes. She realized that right then she was flying into a small room where her life would come to an end. The psychopath stood above, watching it all. He was grateful to his companion for making his pets happy.